Good morning. Welcome to everyone who is joining us at this latest in the series of PiP seminars run by the RIBA Journal. My name is Ruth Slavid. I'm your chair for the day. And before I introduce the speakers, I'm just going to run through a little bit of administration. So you can see that there's both a Q&A and a chat button. If you have questions for the speakers, please put those questions into the Q&A function. There is also the chat function, which is for more general comments, and also we found really useful in the past discovering where people have come from. So if you can say where you are, we've had people coming from quite a lot of exotic places as well as non-exotic. So whether you're in San Francisco or Surbiton, we would love to hear from you. Just tell us where you are. You're in great company. I can see there are currently 327 people here. So I will move on. Obviously, a lot of you, I'm sure, are at home. So talking about the home is incredibly important to us at the moment. I don't know how many of you have looked around and thought, oh, if only I could be somewhere better. In a lot of cases, of course, you want to design that place for yourselves. And it could be in a really far-flung and interesting location, or it could be anywhere that looks less promising, but actually proves to be really interesting. And we're going to address all that today. We've got 4 fantastic speakers. And what's going to happen is each one is going to speak, and then we will have some questions for that particular speaker. So if you have got questions, please do push them in actually while the speaker's talking. That will be really helpful. And after the first 2 presentations, we will have a short break, comfort break, coffee break, whatever you want it to be. But I would suggest, please, stay connected to the Zoom call. Just walk away from your computer or do something else, but don't log off and come back again. So I think that's all the admin stuff. And I'm now really happy to introduce the first of our presentations. After this, we will have 3 individual architects talking about individual projects. But first of all, we're actually going to have an interview session where Helen Castle, who is publishing director of the RIBA Journal, is going to interview Jacqueline Green of Green and Teggin Architects. And this is particularly interesting because Jacqueline is going to be talking about how to extend your Victorian terrace house, which is an issue which obviously a lot of people have to contend with, or if you like, a lot of people see the potential of. And in fact, it's the subject of a book that she's written, which is recently published by RIBA Publishing. There will be details of how to get hold of it, again, in the chat. But I'm delighted to tell you that whereas the book normally costs £45 for 1 week only, and I think this will be actually instituted within the next hour or so, it's available at a £10 discount for £35. So you may think you're interested in it now. I think you certainly will feel interested once you've heard Jacqueline talking about it. So I am going to hand over to Helen and to Jacqueline for our first presentation. Looking forward to hearing it.
Good morning.
Morning.
And first of all, I really want to say congratulations to Jacqueline on the publication of her book, which was published last month. And I received this book in the post, and I'm going to just hold it up and show it to you. It's a really beautiful book. And we go through a process. I'm publisher on the books as well as the journal side, and we go through a process when we receive a book proposal and we get it costed and we get it reviewed, and then we decide whether we're going to contract it. And I remember very vividly when this book came through to contract meeting, and it was an absolute no-brainer in terms of a yes, because it's such a fantastic subject for a book, but also because Jacqueline was really clear from the start that this book was going to be packed with plans. So It's got the most beautiful drawings in it, hand-drawn plans throughout. And I think for any architect, that's what's going to make it both attractive, appealing, and really, really useful. Actually, another feature of the book, which I love, Jacqueline, is the fact that we've got, if you have a look at the front cover, the curtains and the front cover, and then I think it was picked up to use in the end papers. Overall, it's just a beautiful object. It's on lovely matte paper as well. So you get these plans all drawn to scale by Jacqueline. There's a lot of love has been put and care and attention has been put into this book, both in terms of Jacqueline's time drawing all those plans and then the production and design qualities as well. So really turning to the subject of the book, which is how to extend a Victorian terrace house. The Victorian terrace house is one of the most beloved and ubiquitous housing types throughout the UK. And I remember when I was a student in Norwich, you'd find a similar house type, you know, walk through bedrooms and upstairs in Manchester or Liverpool. They're across the UK. And they really are, they're what Victorian terrace houses really give, I think, the kind of British or English character to our cities, really, our towns and cities. And despite the constraints of terraced housing, I think the majority of the urban population would still choose to live in a Victorian terrace rather than a new build, which I think is why extending a house makes it such an appealing project for clients. So I'm going to ask you first of all, Jacqueline, what gave you the idea to write the book? Because it was such a great idea.
It's twofold, really. I suppose for a few years I'd been looking for a book myself, a pattern book for ideas on how best to use space. And also I've been giving lots of consultations to clients over the years and found that most people were asking for similar things. They all had access to mainstream materials and imagery, which was quite limiting. I wanted to show them that there was far more that could be done with a Victorian terrace house than was shown in the general press.
And I think it's that exactly what you describe it as, a pattern book, which is a lovely description for Victorian terraces. So your book is, as we've said, it's packed with house plans for different types of Victorian terrace housing. So what are the main housing types you identify?
Yeah, so there are 7 different types of Victorian terrace house. I mean, there are plenty more, but I tried to pick 7 from the smallest, which is a half house, which has got the double fronted and the same front door, and then it's split into 2, up to maybe 5.4, 5.5 metre wide plot. I didn't really want to go any wider than that because then it becomes more about design than about best use of space. And this book really is about best use of space. I'd say it's a space planning book. And I also wanted to use the split levels, so you can not just to connect space horizontally, but also vertically. And as you say, all the plans are to scale. So the idea is that the homeowner or the architect can measure up the house that they're looking at and then find out the best fit, although there's a mix and match element. So even though there are maybe 150 plans over the different floor levels, there are a lot more options because of the mix and match element.
So there are obviously a lot of architects listening today. What are the key design moves that, in your opinion, can improve the quality and amount of space in a Victorian terrace, you know, beyond the initial brief of just extending out the back or a loft conversion? Because I'm sure a lot of clients just say, oh, I just want to put a big sort of rectangular block out the back. So what else do you come in and suggest, really?
I think with most design, whether it's Victorian or not, you've got to look at circulation, because that's viewed as wasted space. So consolidating and minimizing circulation space on these very long terraces, these long houses, That has to be the fundamental problem to look at, I suppose.
You've got those deep plans, haven't you, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, without very much light.
Yeah.
So how do you, I mean, budget is always key, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you work with the client to ensure the budget for an extension does not surpass the ceiling price for the property in the area or the contract value that they've given you to start with?
Yeah, so we give an estimate based on an experience, really, at the very beginning of the project, a range, I suppose. And then we do recommend that they get a cost plan done at various stages, depending on how much leeway they have in their budget. We don't get involved in valuing houses. We're not indemnified to do that. So we'd recommend speaking to a local estate agent for that instead.
So what restrictions are particular to the Victorian terrace as a house type? You know, if you're an architect and you've not actually worked on Victorian terrace before, how can architects, for instance, respond creatively to the challenges such as party walls, restricted access, and balancing the desire for more light with privacy?
Yeah, so as we've already mentioned, it's the very long, deep plan. And if we're going out further, then that also makes it even longer and deeper. So one of the ways to tackle that is to put the rooms that need less light into the centre of the plan, like utility room, toilets, even kitchens, and have the dining areas, living areas, and bedrooms where the windows are. That's quite obvious. And also with the typical Victorian plan, you have the main body of the house and then the outrigger at the back. And a lot of people go out to the side return extension, which I've got a lot of in the book. But if you've got a longer garden, you can also build onto the back of the outrigger, keeping the side return as a courtyard, which then retains the light and the ventilation and the depth of view. And it consolidates circulation space as well. So if you've got a longer garden, you can look at that to try and keep the light into the deeper parts of the house.
So, I know that you cover energy saving and renewable energy solutions in the book. Mm-hmm. So what are the main energy saving ideas or renewable energy solutions that you'd recommend to your domestic clients?
I suppose the most cost effective is to increase the amount of insulation you have, both in the existing part of the house if possible, loft insulation. We've even clad the side of our house externally because you've got quite a lot of external wall on the outrigger, and obviously in the new part of the house. Just we often recommend putting extra insulation in because it's just a really cheap way of upping the efficiency. Solar panels, either PVs or the solar water heating panels are often a good way, unless you're in a very shady area, obviously. And then a lot more people are getting interested in the air source heat pumps as well. And there are grants now that again are being recommended. You know, there's the Green Deal and now there's this new deal coming out. But you've got to weigh up the cost efficiency of actually using an improved installer, because they have to pay for their course and then their registration, and that does bring the price of the installation up, often more than the grant would be worth. So you just got to make sure that you look into both options.
That's a good tip. Obviously, with you're kind of working in extraordinary times now. How have clients' briefs shifted since the pandemic? Have you seen any kind of changes in terms of what clients are asking for their houses?
It's early days. I'd say there've been a lot more inquiries. People are sitting at home thinking, what can we do? And they're spending a lot more time at home. And there already was a shift towards home offices, and particularly garden rooms. And I think that this pandemic has accelerated that shift, really.
That's great. I'm gonna turn now and see, we haven't got any questions in the Q&A, but I think there's one in the chat that I can see here, and it picks up on that point about insulation, and they're asking if you can recommend any foam polyurethane foam insulation such as Kingspan post Grenville. Would that be green?
I wouldn't know. Sorry.
That's a very technical question.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think also it's difficult. You can't actually recommend products either. I'm just going to ask if anyone would like. Here we've got a question. Oh, and it picks up on the point about offices. Do you think those working from home or their employers should pay business rates or convert to live work use? Now that's really outside your kind of remit, I think, as a designer. I think that's a policy question, really. Obviously, there's so much change going on at the moment. It's very difficult to say really how things are going to pan out. I think I was just going to close with a question for you about clients, Jacqueline, and just really ask you how residential clients differ from commercial clients, and if you have a kind of preference in terms of working in the sector.
Yeah, I mean, I do like working with residential clients. There's obviously an element of hand-holding. I think especially where I work, there's definitely been an increase in knowledge about timescales and what to expect. But what I really love about working with residential clients is that they're working to realize dreams and to increase quality of life. So it's not just about the bottom line of profit. So the question you asked earlier about budget, and obviously that is really important, but most clients understand that it's not a profit thing. It's about trying to increase their quality of life. They want to live in the area that they've lived in there before. They've maybe got children at the school and they've set down roots. So yeah, it's really not about the bottom line of profit, and that's what I most like about working with residential.
You like making a difference, really. It's very tangible in terms of the difference to people's lives, isn't it?
Yeah, and I like to work with people's tastes as well. Sometimes not. Most of the time, I like to bring out their tastes and not try and impose my own tastes on them. And I like working to different boundaries or within different boundaries, and they give that as well with their different tastes and briefs.
I've got two good questions for you here. Firstly, from Emma Breen, and these are design questions for you. So, for a modern semi-detached property that has a kitchen diner leading straight off the living room, how would you create an office space, a snug?
I suppose where most people are going now is in the garden. If you have a garden. I have been asked to design a few, and I love doing it. And I thought maybe it would be kind of a different arm in my business for a while, but it worked out a lot more expensive to build than you would get one off the shelf, obviously. So it didn't prove the right way. It depends also on what headroom you've got. You could maybe have a mezzanine. I mean, I don't know if you're building out to the back, or there's the loft. You know, you could build in the loft. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And there's also, you could just have it depends how noisy your room is, but if you have a desk that you can just shut away and open up again in the corner of a room, that's also another option.
Oui.
Lots of alternatives. To asking you a specific question about loft conversions, do you ever suggest adding a dormer And if so, how do you approach dormer design?
Yeah, and nearly all of the designs in the book actually are for full width dormers. There are some that are smaller, and that's for conservation areas. And there are plenty. As I say, this book's about space planning, and there are I don't know 50 different options in the book for different ways to design your dormer. And I didn't say this earlier, but I often come across the problem of having not enough headroom in a loft, and so there are lots of different options for maybe going out over the outrigger, or yeah, there are lots of different options for tackling that problem as well.
That's great. Well, I think we're gonna close now. So thank you very much, Jacqueline.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and really a pleasure to see the published book. So
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed to both of you. That's very interesting. Apologies to all our delegates for the technical blip, but I can see that you are all back in great numbers now. And we're going to move on to our second speaker, and we are off to an island now, albeit it's the Isle of Man rather than anywhere more exotic than that. But Greg Lomas, who is founder and practice director of Foster Lomas, is going to talk to us about a really interesting looking house that he has designed there.
Okay, I will just share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, my name is Greg Lomas. I'm one of the founding partners of Foster Lomas Architects. And today I'm going to talk about the project that we built on the Isle of Man, which is called a restorative retreat for Sartfell. This is the house that we designed on the site, so emerging from the landscape. And the landscape is really a key part of the project, and how we react to it and how we preserve it are fundamental parts of it. So it's located on the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea. The Isle of Man is known for the TT races, but it's also one of the common sites that you see on the island are these small white cottages that you can see on in the top of the image there. And what's worth noting is that the Isle of Man is a UNESCO World Biosphere site, so the ecology of the island is preserved, and something that is seen as a tremendous asset and unique really on the planet. So these are our clients, Peter and Carol. Peter is a scientist, Carol is an educator, and they became actively involved with the Isle of Man and decided that they had a kind of vision of creating a nature reserve on the island that they could live in. And they'd identified this site when we met them. So what they wanted to do was build a house and then create a nature reserve around the house. And they found us through this project, which is our Sumatran house. This is called the Bukit Luang Lodge. And they saw how nature was kind of taking over this modern piece of architecture. And they really they were kind of inspired to approach us on that basis. So we kind of developed some ideas which are really quite similar in some respects. So the site itself is located, this is the Isle of Man, it's located quite close to the centre of the island. The picture on the right shows the site in red, and just to the right of where the site is, that's the top of Sartfell mountain. And this is an image of the house and the mountain. So you can see the scale of the landscape here. You can see the little white cottage, which was part of the site. And I'll just play this video. So this is looking down from the top of the mountain, and they're sort of rolling, very, very large rolling hills, really. You can see the cottage there, and then on the left, to the left of the cottage, we've got our new house, which links to the cottage. And you can see the view. So this is facing south, and the sort of valley that's in front of the house is part of the nature reserve. So one of the things you have to deal with on the Isle of Man is the weather. Because it's an island, it's in the Irish Sea, it gets a lot of weather and it moves very, very fast. So you can go from a bright sunny day to cloudy mist in the valleys within the space of maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And this is something we had to deal with on the site. So this is a picture from the site. This is where we just come out of the ground, built the lower levels. We were getting ready to build the upper part of the building. You can see the cottage on the right-hand side. This gives you an illustration of what the weather's like. So it's, the wind is relentless. So everything kind of bends to the wind effectively, and it's something you have to contend with in terms of building, and it was something that we were warned about when we started looking at constructing a building on the island. Really, the strength of the wind would just destroy most sort of windows and doors. So we had to think very carefully about how we constructed the building. So one of the things that we did is we set up a weather station on the site, and we gathered together about 18 months worth of data. And this was fed into the environmental engineers' calculations, and they were able to give us quite substantive ideas about how we should work with the local environment to make a very efficient building. So this is the site before work started. So you can see the cottage on the left-hand side, and it's got a lot of extensions that are quite ugly and just ad hoc additions, really, nothing kind of planned or thought out. And in the foreground, we've got a menage for training horses. So this was something that our clients, Peter and Carol, wanted to return back to nature. So here you can see the site. So on the left, you've got the original aerial photograph. So you've got the menage, which is quite a large sort of rectangular area. And then the cottage with all its extensions and a garage just to the north of it, next to the road. So our new scheme sort of rationalises the whole site, and the house started out as an extension to the cottage. So the cottage is about 65 square metres. The extension or new house was 350 square metres. And the planners originally wouldn't give us planning permission for a new dwelling on the site. So it had to be an extension, and then once it was built, we applied to turn them into two separate dwellings. Now on the right-hand plan, you can see another building, which is actually a visitor centre just to the southwest of the cottage. And this was a prerequisite of planning, really. In order to build the house and create the nature reserve, the clients wanted it to be a public resource. And so we committed to building a visitor centre, which I'll show you right at the end, to attract tourists and for local schools and other organisations to utilise the site and study the nature reserve. So this plan shows the house, the visitor centre, and the extent of the nature reserve. We worked with the Manx Wildlife Trust, who did a baseline survey of the site just to understand exactly what the flora and fauna were on the site, so we could then later on monitor the development of the nature reserve and see how well it was doing. So this is part of the survey. This was all submitted to the planning authority when we went for planning. And this is the Manx Wildlife Trust. So this is actually the Modern House estate agency, and Will, my business partner, and Adam, the architect, working with the Manx Wildlife Trust in order to start repopulating the cultivated land. And here's a picture of them on top of the building. So what we had on top of the building were these green roofs, which were basically they were propagated through wind-blown seeds. So we didn't plant anything on these roofs. It's all arrived through natural process, effectively. And this is one of the things that we were interested in terms of using the stone. Not only are dry stone walls a kind of key feature of the landscape, they also become part of the landscape. They get populated, all the niches, spaces that contain plants and insects, and even birds occasionally. This is just an illustration of an old cottage that's been kind of consumed by nature. So we wanted to achieve a building that did something similar. So this is a diagram just showing the walls that create almost like a backdrop to the cottage. So they're much more discreet, and the new building blends into the landscape, and we kind of present the heritage cottage as a much more preserved and original building. And then the triangular element at the top is the office. So it's like a kind of lookout point. And then there's a staircase and library in the center, which we call the knowledge center, which knits all the 3 floors together. This is the ground floor plan, so that the sort of middle plan. So we've got the cottage at the top left, and then on the other side you've got a double garage, and then the main living space is on the south side. So you've got this kind of cranked form, which has the dining area and the kitchen in it, and then the staircase and the library in the centre. So this is the cottage and the new house together. So you can see how it blends into the landscape. These were key views for the planners. So we actually did some montages to begin with to illustrate how it would look. This is another video that we took coming in from the south side. So you can see the cottage and the new house on the right hand side, and the top of the mountain behind it. You can see the menage as well has been filled in. So the building really comes out of the landscape. And this is the staircase and the kind of knowledge center. So this is the kind of filtered staircase. It's all steel. We didn't want to use glass, and the light comes in from the top. This is the living space, and you can see the library beyond. One of the key features is what we call the ribbon window, which wraps around and creates views across the valley. So our clients are very keen ornithologists, so the building is almost like a bird hide, so you can track the flight of the birds going up and down the valley. There's Peter with his binoculars. It's an external view of the ribbon window. And then this is a bay window which looks out towards the sea, so you get a sea view here. This is it from the outside. Another view of that bay window with the dogs in the window. The key was framing the views all the way around. And then behind the building on the north side, we created this sheltered garden because of the winter. The wind was so strong and constant. We created this kind of sheltered garden with a tree in the center. You can see the roof getting populated with grass as well. So that was the ground floor. This is the upper level. So here we've got the office space and the staircase again, linking it together. Another image of the knowledge centre. And then in the lower level, we've got the bedrooms and bathrooms. And the staircase again comes down, so we get this kind of filtered light coming from above. But because it's dropped into the site, you get daylit windows as well. One of the important things to note about the building is the stonework. Sort of 80–90% of the stone came from the site. So when we dug the lower level, we excavated and harvested all the stone, and that was then used to create the facade of the building. And this is how it was built. So this is a section through the building. On the left-hand side, you've got a construction detail, and effectively, it's like a giant cavity wall. So you've got a concrete wall on the inside, which is exposed, insulation, then a cavity barrier, and then half-bedded stonework. So we created these niches in the stone, in the face of the stone, which could be then populated by plants and insects. And this is our environmental strategy. So we used a lot of different technologies here. We used a combination of things, so solar thermal panels, wind energy, biomass, and also a ground source heat pump. We created a lake on the site in the nature reserve, which the ground source heat pump was installed into. And then we've got kind of clever things like earth sheltering and wind sheltering in order to kind of improve the performance of the building through design. This shows the sort of stacked ventilation to that knowledge centre or library space. Sorry about that. So this shows the stacked ventilation coming through the office space at the top. And this was a diagram just exploring the solar gain that was going to be coming through the ribbon window and the link building, which links the cottage to the new house. And here's a couple of images of the visitor centre. So this is a model that we built of it. So again, it kind of sits into the site. And this is scheduled to be built in the next 12 months. And that's it from me.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I mean, I found that fascinating, and obviously everybody else did as well, because I've had some really interesting questions come in.
Okay.
One of them is asking how difficult it is through the planning process to actually design something as an extension and then later get permission to turn it into two separate dwellings. And I don't know whether you just want to make a note while you're talking about that, about whether I've no idea what planning is like on the Isle of Man. Is it separate? Is it a different system, or is it a system that we're all used to?
It's a similar system. I mean, it's a small place, so
Yeah.
everybody knows what's going on. And there are other places in the UK that operate in a similar fashion. You know, we've worked in Cornwall.
Right, but it's UK planning law.
Yeah, it is. But because you've got quite a tight-knit community, it's very important to kind of engage with people. And I think one of the, you know, that was really, really important because we were architects that weren't from the island. And our clients weren't from the island either. So it was very important to kind of engage with the local community, you know, get to meet the parish councillors, get to meet the local councillors and, you know, politicians and so on. And our clients were very good at doing that and kind of selling the idea of the scheme. And I think, you know, there was a lot of support from the council for what was being proposed. You know, they're very keen to encourage tourism. They're very keen to improve the image of the Isle of Man, you know, to outsiders, because it's got this kind of reputation of sort of tax exiles and, you know, Lewis Hamilton flying his helicopter in and things like this. And they don't really want to promote that side of things. They're really very keen on encouraging tourism, and they're very, very keen to preserve the natural environment on the island as well. So the combination of those two things really helped us gain planning. I think without them, we wouldn't have gained planning, actually.
That's interesting. So a couple of questions here that relate to each other. One of them says, well, the use of materiality is beautiful. Are the floors polished concrete? To which I suspect the answer is yes, because I was looking at them. But someone else said, what was the decision-making process in using such hard internal surfaces?
Well, the floors are polished concrete.
Yeah.
And we wanted to create a building that had a sort of longevity to it, I suppose, and really it was almost like you were in the earth, you know, you're in the kind of,
yeah,
you really get a sense of being within the landscape, not sitting on top of it in a house. It was very much part of the landscape. I mean, there are practical reasons for using concrete as well, because we were digging into the ground, we had to waterproof it and so on. It made a lot of sense to use concrete, and we had these big cantilevers as well with the window and so on. So doing it in any other way was going to be extremely difficult.
Right. You showed those lovely images of sort of older houses being colonized, you know, and especially fallen down houses being colonized by nature. Obviously, I mean, it's a glorious thing, and you've actually made provision for that. But sometimes one does think that nature's not completely friendly to man-made structures. And somebody actually asked, were there concerns about insects getting into the cavity and eating or damaging the insulation? You know, how do you combine, I suppose that's a particular question, but how do you combine that feeling of being in and part of nature with actually having a building that you don't want to become so much part of nature that it falls down or becomes compromised?
True. Well, I think because we've sort of half bedded the stone in cement, it's not really a dry stone wall. It is a kind of continuous element in that respect. And also we have the cavity barrier as well. So we've got this product called SureCav, which we use within the cavity in front of the installation. Because the stone, the way it's laid, can be quite porous sometimes. So that was the reason for the SureCav, and really that would also prevent anything getting into the insulation layer.
Right. That's great. I mean, I've had a couple of questions. I won't put them to you in detail because I think you to see whether you can answer that. But are you able to share anything about the costs?
Well, the cost of the building was £1.2 million.
Right. And how did that work out per metre squared or?
Per metre squared, I'd have to work it out. It's round about, it's about 350 square meters. So
Right. Okay. Well, we'll allow everyone to do their sums themselves.
yeah, it's sort of
That's
£3,500
really helpful.
a square meter, I guess, something like that.
Yeah. And somebody's asked, how successful have you found the environmental systems, including the ground source heat pumps? Did you have a more conventional heating system, or are you able to rely entirely on those systems?
We're able to rely entirely on it. I mean, you know, it's a new building, so the fabric, we did take a fabric first approach as well.
Yeah.
So it's a very well insulated building. So that makes a massive difference. So the heating requirements are as low as they can possibly be.
Right.
And it does rely on the ground source heat pumps.
And so the house, the original cottage, is going to eventually be something completely separate, is it?
Well, the original cottage is now used for visitors. So
okay, yeah.
You can actually stay in. You can stay in the cottage and live within the nature reserve.
Yes. Oh, here we are. This isn't even a question for you, but perhaps I'll finish with it. Thank you, Greg, for a most interesting presentation, a wonderful project. Loved your empathy with the site and biodiversity.
Thank you very much.
I think that's a pretty nice place to finish. And what we're going to do now is we are going to take a break for about 15 minutes. So as I said, if everyone can just leave their connection to the Zoom call open while you go away and do whatever it is that you want or need to do. And we will start back promptly at 10:10. Or of course, whatever time it is in whatever time zone you, the audience, happen to be in, but that is in 15 minutes time. So I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Again, before I go on to the next presentation, just a couple of things. The details of how to order Jacqueline's book are now in the chat. And the other thing is, I would ask you again, if you have questions, can you put them in the Q&A? And it's really interesting to notice how always people wait until the Q&A session and then they start desperately typing. And some people have typed in their questions after the whole presentation is finished. And it may be that the speaker will be very nice and come back to you. Quite often they do. But if you think you've got a question, please can you type it in while the speaker's presentation is going on, is the best chance of getting your question answered. Now, we looked at a house in the middle of the countryside that was pretty much a new build, albeit associated with an old cottage. And that was fascinating. We're now going to look at something which is equally fascinating, but very different. It's urban in London, in St. John's Wood, and it is working in an old house, a beautiful old house, obviously made even more beautiful. And I'm going now to hand over to Nico Stassano, who is founder of Studio Stassano, and he's going to talk to you about Blenheim Road. So, Nico.
Hi, this is Nico. I'm principal of Studio Stassano with architects working in central London. And today I wanted to share a project in St. John's Wood. Here we go. This is a residence, and this came through a client which had purchased a property next to a house which I'd done right next door. This is a listed building built in 1840s, and it's grade 2. So I just wanted to introduce the existing plan, because it always comes down in how you can adapt and change these Victorian dwellings.
Sorry to interrupt. You're not actually sharing your slides.
I'm not sharing the slides.
No.
Okay, is it visible now?
That's perfect. Yeah, if you want to go full screen, we're good to go.
So, okay. Here we go. Okay, so here what I was saying, this is a semi-detached terrace, 1840s, and it's Victorian. It had some alterations in the past, but not significant alterations. So you can see on the right, this is the building. Just introduce the existing building. What I was saying before, the interesting part is how these dwellings are not only how they've evolved through time, but how they will get changed to accommodate the current modern lifestyles. This property, one of the interesting bits, it had a lower ground, but as a lower ground, historically, mostly there would have been back of house spaces. But you can see from this plan, it's completely detached from the external garden, and it used to accommodate, and it accommodated mostly all the rooms. The ground floor, it's potentially the more family floor, and you can see that in time it had changed to accommodate the kitchens, which usually there would have been on the lower grounds. And then on the upper levels is more restrained floors, and you could only have a limited number of bedrooms. So in this house, most of the bedrooms were mostly on the lower ground. You can see there's a side extension, and that side extension is a later development, was added around 1940, so post-war. And with that, also a small rear extension. Unusual, but this property, although being listed, had lost the original stair that led to the lower ground, and a new stair was introduced in the side extension. So this is the house, so you can see the 1940s rear extension, which is quite small, but you can see the relationship with the external ground. It essentially was dug, and it was sunk within the external landscape. So the only connection to the rear was through the rear terrace. To give you a feel of the spaces, this is the side extension where the stair is going down, and then you have a feel about the lower levels. So very cellularized, very small spaces, quite dark, with very limited access and views to the exterior. So most projects, a significant aspect that impacts rear extensions and basements, because also this project has a basement, is trees. So this is a primary study that shows the root protection area of these trees, and which has defined the proposals. So very large trees, end of terrace, and significant impact. So I'll take you through what was a process which was from pre-planning, planning, and the build. And what you see here is the pre-planning. So the pre-planning always becomes a part of the process where we begin to test the brief, but as well test planning law. Like all nice basements, they always start with a swimming pool. So in the beginning, the client, which has a family, young children, the idea that they were going to move into this property, and they aspire to have a swimming pool, and a large basement which could accommodate a gym, a cinema room, and then some bedrooms. And the lower ground would be the space that would be transformed. And the idea is that the kitchen, which was on the ground floor, would be moved onto the lower ground, and the lower ground would then become the heart of this family home. And what was primarily important is that the spaces would be opened up. Not only opened up as larger open plan areas, but opened up so they could also then connect to the exterior. So you could see that the landscape being carved away, again, with the limitations of the root protection area. And this is why pretty much you see the forms that we're having. The aspiration of a large rear extension that could then be fully opened to the rear. And what you'll see later on through the images is the insertion of a new stair, which is much more celebrated than what was there before. Then the kitchen set at the back. So you begin to see the relationship between the root protection area, or the elements of the ground that had to be retained, and elements that could be carved away, and how that began to interface with the aspirations for a large extension. So this is the ground floor. You can see the rear extension at the back, and then the balcony that's been retained. So this is the initial visuals, and in here you can see potentially is that a slight conflict, you know, for a client desire to extend out, and a real sort of constraint which had to do with the root protection area. So what you begin to see now is a process after pre-planning, where obviously the rear extension was reined back in, and in a way will sit more harmoniously within this landscape. And this is the revised visuals. What I'll go now on to is the house itself. So I'll start sharing the plans which got approved and which were built. And I'll start from the basement. Pretty much what defines the basement is always the footprint of the original house that you underpin. In this case, is the original house plus the side extension. In this case, we had demolished the site. We managed to get permission to demolish the side extension because it was an addition, and rebuild it. And what you then have is areas outside of the footprint, which is it's always what then becomes to give an opportunity or defines the interior, which is the light wells. So you see that what you begin to carve out or begin to create spaces is always define how you can bring light and ventilation in. So we've got at the front the 2 light wells, which then would dedicated to 2 rooms. One of them would be a gym, and the other one would be a guest bedroom. And then towards the rear of the property was a larger space, which became a multifunctional space, which had a larger light well. And this space would meant to be a cinema room, a children's play area, a place that they could entertain their guests for parties. And the concept was always working with light, trying to bring light in, and create a sense of openness. And here the opportunity was bringing down the stairs, which was essentially a triple height stair that started at the ground floor and then went all the way down to the basement. And to be able to open up this narrative of circulation into the basement using glazed partitions. So this is a set of crystal glazed partitions that would allow to perceive this large volumes as soon as you come down. Always key interventions are trying to get light and views across. So we had this long corridor, which then would be fed light from these 2 light wells. Now moving up, the actual plan. So again, you can see this, the heart of the family home. This is where we've extended out. We've opened, created a structural opening into the original principal rear elevation, and as well as into the rear principal or the front principal room, which would have historically been subdivided. So again, trying to get those axes of views and light, which working back to front. And again, this real feature, which is the stair that begins to connect all these different levels. It's a service entrance, which is kept from the front, so you can come down the stairs and go into the property. And how the landscape was sort of carved away within the restriction of the root protection area to allow access out and allow, or to remove the feeling of a sunken house in the landscape, but to make it feel more as an upper ground or a ground rather than basement. The ground floor, not much had changed, but what we did is reinstate a room towards the rear by removing the kitchen and then creating that wonderful connection to the new stair. As you can see, the rear extension still retained the opportunity for a terrace. And finally, the top floor. So what we had before was 2 rooms. Now with the possibility of building an additional story to the side extension, that allowed us to create more rooms. But essentially, the side extension was pivotal to these proposals, but also is what became essentially very contentious at the planning stage. And this is where sort of all projects, they start with a very short program, but end up running very long. So what typically could have been done in maybe 6 or 7 months went down to 1 year and 6 months just because of the appeal process. But what I show you here is what would have seemed totally logical. It is a previous plan application that was made, again, 1940s, granted for site extensions. And essentially, these Italianate style houses, although they were semi-detached, were built to look like symmetric halls, look like one villa. And symmetry was very important to them. But what had happened is that the application was permitted, but only the neighbor at number 2 built it, and our property didn't have it. So eventually, with appeal, it was finally granted, and we managed to get the additional story. So what I'm going to run now through is a series of snapshots that will interchange in time. So you'll see what's current and what was built or what was during construction. So this is the rear, this is the rear extension. You can see that sort of pinch point or relationship with the root protection area. And an extension that wanted to be sympathetic to the historic building, but also be more contemporary. We've used zinc, so this has all been zinc cladded. We try to maximize the amount of glazing as much as possible to bring views out, as well try to bring the landscape into the property. The introduction of a metal stair, which we wanted to keep quite light, so it has a sort of zigzag stringer to it. And again, this is just to give you a snapshot of what that same site looked like when we were building it. So this is essentially the stairs leading outside the rear extension, and this is the tiered landscape that was being built. Later on, how that was finished, this was finished in porcelain, 20 mil thick porcelain, and every piece was mostly manufactured off-site to create the right edges, the right edging detail, and it was assembled and installed. Moving from the inside, and this is in a sense what the property wanted to achieve, obviously within the limitations of the landscape and its levels, but the idea of opening out to the rear garden. So not feeling sunken, but trying to open outside. And again, the decision in this case was made with using folding sliding doors, so that in the summer this could all be stacked away onto the side, and one could appreciate the external environment, and the outside would come inside. You could see the opening to the rear, to the front wall, so the kitchen, and the kitchen again looking back. And that has been built. So this is, as we built it, we had a new lower ground floor slab. This had underfloor heating. Again, you can see the structural openings from the front room towards the rear. And just the amounts of cabling and services that really have to work their way through these historic interiors. A view to again, from the inside looking out. And this is really trying to make as much as possible of pulling away the landscape. So we could allow light and aspect outside. This is the construction that shows us the metalwork and the formwork for that roof. And I must say, to all extensions, all rear extensions, the roof is one of the most difficult aspects, because we got limitations in the depths, limitations in levels, trying to tie in with the ground floor. And the amounts of acrobatics that happens at this stage in terms of structure is, I would say, spends quite a lot of time is required to get these right. This is a view essentially like a long section. So you can see that this is the opening created within the principal buildings, always large steels to hold up the house above, and then the extension being built out. Another aspect which always becomes quite an important aspect is how do you actually drain the principal house. So this shows the downpipes, waste pipes, and rainwater pipes are tucked away in the corners. Some of this actually making their way into the basement. But most important, trying to make all the upper levels gravity drain towards the sewers, and trying to take as little as possible down to the basement. These are views again, and quite important features, trying to get light in. So every time we have an extension, the idea is to cut away a slot right at the boundary, or right at the rear wall. There's the new, you can see here the new stair. And again, views to the lower ground. Quite important again, as you can see the cross views, this is a view towards the front of the property, pulling away the landscape so that views could be set outside. But most important, and really an astonishing part of the build is these houses, or however small they are, or however small they feel, building a basement there's a large exercise that goes into that. And the amount of steel work and structures required just to hold up these properties is incredible. What you can see here is a total the formwork and sacrificial pins as well, steel work that is just holding a house that's hovering above us. And you can see here the basement being built and the whole piles that have been done. Again, snapshots. This is the openings, suddenly openings onto the side extension that was rebuilt. And snapshots of the basement. And it really did feel like a different world. You'd walk down this basement. You're always looking for height, always looking for ceiling height. And the finishes are not here, and these were vast, large spaces. But what you see here is just before we were going to insert, or the space where eventually the stair will come down to. The stair that was built, again, this was selected with our client, and they felt they wanted something slightly industrial. And so we designed this a metal stair that was wholly perforated and would float within the slide, allowing the light to go through by the perforations. And even this was quite a challenge. The whole stair was built and fabricated outside in the workshop, but because we were looking for specific details, or in instances seamless, all of the stair was actually painted on site. It was this electrostatic paint, which was done after this was inserted into the volumes. Now we start to go down to the basement. So that as you come down the stairs, you've got the sort of crystal glazed openings that would open up into this sort of multifunctional media room. It was quite effective, as it did allow a sense of openness. This is looking back at the stair now. And from that media room, the light well. So in this case, it wasn't a folding sliding door, but it was just a sliding door, because we wanted to minimize the amount of framing to create more openness. But the idea is that these could be opened up, and then essentially they would bring ventilation and light inside. And this is pretty much before that. So all the basement was waterproofed with delta membranes, and these were all went down into modular sumps, which then would drain the membrane. The whole basement was made of was membrane, insulation, and then block work. And then on top of the block work, we'd get quite a rigid finish, so we could then plaster on top of that. And again, snapshots of the basement. An interesting thing is that you always get is the basement's always built with concrete, and a usual, I think, coordination issues is that the builders never really get the builders work right. And so it always happens that once this is all done, then holes are chopped up and cut out. And this is where really the engineers get all quite worried. And then back to the inside. This is, again, is that central corridor, to which to one end there's a guest WC. To the left, as you see here, is that multifunctional room. And then facing the other way is down the corridor, which then leads onto the 2 bedrooms. And at the end of that corridor is essentially an opportunity to bring a little bit light from those light wells, but it's also the utility room. Again, you can see here work in progress photos. The build process, the amounts of cabling and services that have to be routed through this basement is incredible. Here, this is the room at the end of that corridor, which was the utility room. And within that utility room, we had the hub. So we had all the lighting, Lutron panels, as well as all the AV racks. And you can see just the amount of cabling, again, that came to this location. And then tucked away on the side was the plant room. So we've wanted, or this property was designed to have ventilation, mechanical ventilation to the lower levels, and then cooling to the basement, lower ground, and master bedroom. This is, again, one of the light wells, just separating the utility room from the bedrooms. And this is one of the bedrooms. So what always comes as an opportunity in these historic buildings is that the lower ground or basement do not need to be very classical. And so there's more opportunities to provide more contemporary design. So as you can see in this case, is the doors are all full height. We got seamless finish, recessed skirtings, no cornices. The light wells, again, views through, and some of the interiors of the bathrooms. Again, that very same space, you could see that the slot that goes into one of the bedrooms. This is the other room next to it. This was used also as a gym. So in this case, we also had air conditioning, but it could also function as a bedroom. The light wells were always half and half. We always had a walk-on glass to one side, and on the other side, a grill. So that grill allowed ventilation in, but also a route of escape. And now moving up, this is the ground floor. And this is where the property becomes more classical. So all the historic features are kept. But then you get this transition. This is the view down. This is the stair that then leads to the lower levels, which becomes more contemporary. And again, it's about that light that comes down the stairs. And there's also opportunities bringing light into the historic main entrance. So we created this wonderful skylight onto the original roof. And then again, beautifully lighting the upper landing as well as the main entrance. And again, this is as built in process, this is the skylight. And I'm going to finish here. And then this is the upper level. This is a master bathroom. Again, sensibly trying to keep some of the historic features, and but yet, insert a modern bathroom within that. Okay, so I'm going to.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That was fabulous. And I think particularly it was really lovely to actually go through the process of both of design and of construction. And there are a lot of questions. And they almost all relate to the basement. I'm just going to sort of throw a few things at you and There's quite a few to do with fire. Story height doors. How did you manage fire protection, controlling or sealing? Given your use of sliding doors to the crittle screen at the basement level, was there a reliance on enhanced fire detection to the habitable rooms at all story levels?
Yes, we did. So what we to create this sense of openness throughout the house, we had to introduce, well, these doors that you see here, which are the doors to the media room. These are hinged doors, they're metal, but they're fire rated doors, half an hour fire rated doors. But for the lower ground floor, the whole lower ground floor was open to that staircase, which was then open as an open plan, which you see here. So what we had to do to achieve that, we had to put sprinklers, domestic sprinklers, onto the ground floor.
Right.
So I'll take you to the plan. So the ground floor was equipped with sprinklers. So each of these rooms had one sprinkler. And that allowed us to then create that the sense of openness that we achieved.
Right, okay, sorry, there's a bit going on in your background, isn't there?
Sorry.
Okay, I've had a couple of questions around insurance as well. I'm going to throw them both at you and see how you feel about them. That's if I can find them both. The first one is, I've recently experienced an issue with building insurance. The property under consideration was underpinned to create a part basement. When it came to renew the building insurance policy, the insurers refused to renew because the property had been underpinned to create the basement. So did you have the same experience? And there was also somebody saying, we're finding PI much more difficult and expensive this year. Obviously, this is a different kind of insurance, partly because of having done basements. Having done a wonderful looking basement project, have you found the same? So there's whether this affects your own PI, because I suppose it's seen as a risky undertaking, and also that feeling of, oh, underpinning, there must be a fundamental problem when actually the property has been underpinned because you're creating a basement. I think it'd be really interesting to hear about both of those.
So I think one aspect, if I understand one aspect about insurance, which falls under the insurance between the owner and the builder.
Yeah.
The first question. So I mean, I
don't think it's the owner and the builder. I think it's the owner trying to insure their property afterwards and discovering that because it's had underpinning, that's affecting their insurance.
I see. So
because underpinning is usually a result of subsidence or something, isn't it?
Yeah. So in terms of building the basement, when we build a basement, for instance, this property had subsidence in the past.
Ah, okay.
So it had underpinning. Now, by building a new basement underneath it, this property is more secure from any subsidence. So if anything, it would be more stable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the issues with insurances, I'm not too sure how that will affect a built basement. But if anything, if I can see it, this building will be more secure and more stable. Mm-hmm. But in terms of PI insurance, that's true. I mean, this year I've seen a rise in PI insurance, which is doubled, and that's to do with London being a large, essentially, basement opportunity. So immense basements have been built in London, and a lot of them had issues. So you've got a lot of claims going for basement, and that's mostly to do with structural movement and waterproofing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of insurance have pulled away from this market, not only because it's a difficult market with a lot of problems have arisen, but we also got a lot of lawsuits going on, mm-hmm. a lot of rich people suing each other. So it is quite unfortunate. So I myself had trouble with renewing my PI, and I've had limitations on the PI cover on basements. Uh-huh. But one of the things that we do, and it must be understood, is that as architects, and the liability on basement should be limited, because anything that's to do with waterproofing could be made a contractor design portion. So that design should be taken away from the architects and passed on to the builders, mm-hmm. as a start. And also all the structure is under the structural side. So structures by structural engineers, waterproofing by the contractor. So the exposure is limited.
Mm-hmm.
So these large PI insurances, for instance, we had 2 million on the PI insurance for each and every claim, and that would include the basement. Now we have I think around 400,000 for each and every claim for the basement only.
Okay.
But I don't see that an issue as long as these things are managed, and when you go to construction, the right responsibilities are given to the experts.
That's really useful. I think we could talk about this and a lot more for quite some time, but actually what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to our final speaker. We're moving away from the very elevated area of St John's Wood. We're moving into suburbia, where an awful lot of us live, and I think maybe quite a few architects wrongly don't really aspire to design there, but we have Percy Weston, co-founder of studio Surman Weston, and he's going to talk about his Ditton Hill house, which he's calling Reconciling Suburbia. And I think it is fantastic to see this house, which is both modern and playing on some suburban tropes, but I won't steal your thunder. Percy, over to you.
Hello, let me just share my screen. So, can everyone see that?
That's great.
Great. Thanks for everyone tuning in. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about a new build house that we recently finished in Surbiton, which is a suburb in the fringes of southwest London. It's really an archetypal suburb, satellite town to London. And I'm going to look at today our design process and some of the influences of the design. So let me just fast forward here. Okay, next slide. So as a practice, a big part of our design process in the early stages is based on analysing the context. And so part of that is clearly looking at the local context in which the site sits. So we took a lot of time exploring the area around the house. It's quite a varied suburban area. There are some high quality architectural examples, like the listed Art Deco station by James Rob Scott, which is, you can see on the bottom right there, which we became pretty familiar with over 5 years of doing this project. But most of the vernacular in the area are your kind of archetypal suburban English 19th and 20th century detached houses, including a plethora of half-timbered mock Tudor houses. As you can see, a kind of selection here that we photographed. And then also, strangely, there is a few Art Deco houses in the area. So basically on the previous site, there was a 1930s bungalow which had been extended many times. And so it was a bit of a rabbit warren of rooms. So that was why, in the end, we decided to build a new house. So one of the other design influences obviously comes from the client. So the client for this project was a fashion designer, and she was someone she went out on a lot of shoots in California. And this is an example of one of her references for the project, which when she first approached us. And she really liked the kind of modernist mid-century Palm Springs style houses, which, as you can kind of understand, is a world away from the suburban Surbiton vernacular. So we quite enjoyed the unusual brief that was. And then this is a picture of another precedent that she gave us. So another thing that she really liked was these kind of post-industrial converted warehouse spaces. So New York loft style, and she was very into Crital windows. And for us, the utilitarian nature of this industrial language really attracted us and was something that kind of we responded to at quite an early stage of the project. And so we further looked into quite a few industrial precedents as a kind of area of interest in the project. And we kept on finding interesting examples of steel frame buildings with masonry infill. And clearly it's a kind of totally different setting and use to the buildings in Surbiton, but we felt there were kind of parallels there in the aesthetic with the half timbered mock Tudor having this exposed structure on the outside. So I guess the challenge of the initial design brief for us was to find a way to reconcile these seemingly kind of diametrically opposed styles and building techniques. So the industrial, the modernist, the Art Deco, and then the suburban vernacular. So for us, there was a real joy in finding where these things overlapped and how we could kind of subvert and play with the motifs of these design styles, helping them to have a relationship to one another. So a lot of that was done through, as you'll see, playing with the materiality and the scale of these elements and motifs. So this slide shows a detail of the front of the house. So you can see here, instead of an exposed timber frame used in mock Tudor, we used a steel exoskeleton, which was a structural steel frame. And, you know, this steel is strong. It's kind of the material of modernity. And because of the strength of the steel, the frame was able to be much more minimal. So we could get really kind of slender sections and giving the kind of structure of the house and this kind of simplicity. And so here's a view of the front of the house. So I'll show you here, there's the entrance clearly, and here is the large critile window which looks onto the room at the front of the house. For us, there was a kind of another area of interest of how these styles overlapped, was we kind of saw critile windows almost had a parallel with traditional leaded windows, which are again prevalent in mock Tudor buildings, and they're basically the same windows but on a different scale. So critile windows are really like the kind of leaded windows of the industrial age. We saw it. Then inside, this is a view from the film room, which is right at the front of the house. So the big critile window that you saw on the front elevation is behind you. And yeah, this again, we used quite an industrial system on the ceiling. So it's something called a composite deck, which is a steel tray system, which you then use reinforced concrete on top of it, something kind of very popular in car parks and things like that. And it's actually a very effective system, but we quite like the idea that this almost had a similarity to exposing your beams in your mock Tudor house. So there was a kind of, again, this was like the industrial interpretation of something that was mock Tudor. So on this slide, here's the ground floor plan. So I'll just talk you a little bit through how the house was laid out. So the front of the house is here. This is the drive. This is the rear garden. So with the client's brief for us was that she wanted a house that was spacious and sociable, but wasn't just an open plan box. So the plan that we came up with was a plan which has a lot of separate rooms of different scales, enfilade rooms, so they give on to one another. So at the front, you have the film room, then there's a study, and then this is a big living and dining room. And then what we liked was to be able to close these rooms off, so to give a bit more kind of privacy throughout the house. So when someone was watching a film at full volume, as the client's partner quite often does apparently, they could close it off and make the house a bit more separated. So yeah, I suppose the variety of spatial experiences on the journey through the house is quite important to the design. It's something that we're really keen on emphasizing, and that was because we wanted to really use that to help emphasize various elements of the site. So in particular, we want to emphasize the house's relationship to the garden, which is quite a kind of verdant, kind of developed, mature garden. So one of, hang on, next slide. Yeah, so to do that, we were really interested in how we curate the kind of journey through the house. So as you can see here, the entrance elevation is a kind of much more private elevation. The only window on that elevation is this one looking into the film room. And then you come through into the entrance hall, down this corridor, into this backspace. So what we wanted to do is really create a range of contrasting spatial experiences as you move through the building to maximize, help maximize the impact of coming into this final space and the experience of the garden. So this diagram here explains a bit about the kind of the main tectonics of those spatial experiences. So here, if you can see where my mouse is, here is the entrance space that you come into. So this space we really wanted to emphasize verticality, and you know the plan's quite tight, and we wanted to emphasize the view up to the clouds, basically to the sky. So it's a triple height space when you come into it. So this is a photo showing it. So this is kind of the view immediately as you come in the front door. It's very tall and top lit, so it takes a kind of entire half section of the house. So at the top you have the height of the apex, and then it cross sections all the way through to the eaves of the house. And for us, the kind of height and scale and materiality of this space, we almost felt it became like an interior courtyard, and that was part of we were interested in kind of creating a threshold space, a bit more of a deep threshold between the exterior and the interior in that process of kind of entering into the house. So you can see here, this is still in the entrance hall. This is looking back towards the eaves of the building. So you can see there's this singular point where the eaves meet the edge of that entrance hall. I'll just go back to the plan, and you can see we've rotated the plan 45 degrees here because we wanted this entrance space to feel quite different to the rest of the house. So moving on. So after that very vertical entrance space, you pass down a single step under the stairs through into an interior hall space, which was intended to kind of emphasize compression. So the ceiling's much lower, it's much darker. So there's a really strong spatial contrast between those two spaces. This photo shows a view from this interior hall space looking back towards the entrance. So you can see the kind of really strong light contrast. And then after that kind of compressive space, you then you walk into, you go down another step and you walk into the main space at the back, which has a kind of full width panoramic glazing, as you can see, and the ceiling height kind of goes up and it's much more naturally lit. So yeah, this is a view coming through into that space. The gardens haven't yet been completely done by that point, so it's looking much better now, to be honest. But yeah, I suppose for us it was a big part of this curation of these various spatial experiences was to kind of maximize the impact of coming into this final space. So here on the plan, you can see on this side, this is the dining and living space that I've been talking about. Because we wanted this space to feel on a totally different scale to the rest of the house, it was important that we could make this kind of spacious and con-free. So one of the advantages of using an industrial technique like steel frame was that we could have this space completely con-free, so it wasn't, it didn't have anything kind of interrupting the view. And it also meant we could have a large cantilevered balcony. So this is a view, this is, we're still in this space at the back of the house, looking back towards the fireplace in the living room. So the fireplace is here in the plan. Yeah, and this is a detail of the fireplace and the mantelpiece. This is an example of the quite simple materials that we used in the project. So we built this chimney using precast concrete lintels that you can buy at any kind of local builder. And then we also combined that with the slurried block work. So it's block work and then painted with a mortar slurry and then painted again. And I suppose it's a good point to talk about there being two main palettes within the house. We wanted the circulation spaces and the habitable space to feel quite different, again, with a point to kind of emphasizing the spatial contrast and the difference in feeling between these two types of space. So within the circulation spaces, the materials are much more industrial and rougher. We go back to some of these photos. So, you know, you have the kind of hand troweled concrete floors, and you've got the slurry textured block work on the walls. But then within the habitable spaces, we have oak floors and plaster walls, and it feels a lot warmer. And so the fireplace, as this kind of heart of the house, I suppose, is the only place where these two material palettes are combined. So you have the timber floors and the plaster, but then you also have the block work and the concrete. And then moving on to the first floor plan. So the house is a 2-bedroom house, and it also has 2 bathrooms and 2 dressing rooms. So this is the master bedroom at the back. The garden's here again. 1 dressing room, another dressing room, and then an ensuite and guest room here. And this is the entrance space that we saw before. So the spaces on this level are all within the roof void. So basically all above eaves level. So here we have a view in the master bedroom, which looks out towards the rear garden and directly onto the balcony, which you can see through the doors. The rooms at this level all have quite a dramatic geometry because of their location in the roof void. So you have the eaves come down to kind of 1.5 meters, and then right at the apex you get 5 meters floor to ceiling. So due to planning restrictions, we weren't actually allowed to put windows on the side elevations that could overlook on this level. So that meant most of the other rooms, basically every room apart from the master bedroom, is top lit, which combined with the verticality of these spaces kind of gives that floor a real kind of calmness and more privacy, almost kind of church-like quality, which we felt was more appropriate for bedrooms and places of sleep and ablutions and stuff. So here is a view of the balcony directly outside the master bedroom. So this space, again, we saw as a sort of threshold space to the house. So it gives a level of privacy between the master bedroom and the garden, and using this hit and miss brickwork screen that you can see on the right. So what's nice, it lets lights through, but doesn't allow a complete view all the way through into the bedroom from the rear. And then also importantly, it provides solar shading on both this floor and on the ground floor, which has a lot of glazing. And this is the south elevation, so if we didn't have this, it would have serious problems during the summer. So yeah, we can see here back to that view of the master bedroom and how that view from the inside to the outside is mediated by this brick screen. We also, there's kind of a few details like we designed the balcony handrail to be a bit higher than normal. So it's at 1350, which is kind of, you can still see over it, but it's a bit higher. And what we quite liked about that is when you're standing in the bedroom and standing in the balcony, it kind of reorientates the view up a bit more towards the trees. So it kind of gives you a different view of that part of the site, rather than just giving you the kind of standard view that you also get from the ground floor. So here you can see the rear elevation. So you can see the balcony from there. The light, as you can see from here, the light is also two-way. So when the light starts fading, the daylight starts fading and the lights are on inside, you get this quite nice effect of the house starts kind of lighting up like a lantern. This is a good photo to see on the ground floor. Also, you can see all the way through the house. So right at the back here, that is the window that's on the front of the house. And you can see through all the big sliding doors, they're all open on that side. So that enfilade sequence of rooms. And then also in the middle, you can see the slightly darker circulation space, and that's actually us in the kitchen while the photographer was taking the photos. So the next part of, I'm going to talk a bit more about our design process, aside from looking at the context. So an important part for our studio is a lot of model making, basically. So it's very important for us. And this was a site model, an early site model, the proposal. And as you can see, we did experiment a bit with the brick patterning here. So we have some diagonal brick patterning, but largely, considering this was made very early on in the project, the design intent remained pretty much intact, which is quite unusual actually. And with other models, we like to kind of pick out details for parts of the project that we see are kind of critical to the design. So as I spoke about the entrance space, this sort of internal courtyard really took quite a while to develop to the design that we eventually had. So from the left, that was the initial design, to the right, which was the eventual configuration. So the left-hand side is much more orthogonal and conventional, and then we ended up here. So this is a detailed view of that model. The materiality moved on again after that, but the configuration basically stayed the same. I'm aware of the time. Ruth, have we got a couple more minutes? Oh, I can't hear you. I take that as a yes.
Yeah, I think everyone's enjoying it. So yeah, let's crack on.
All right, sure.
Sorry, that's me. I muted myself. I apologise. I'm back. Yes, give us a couple of minutes, and then we'll come on to the questions that everybody wants to ask.
I've got a mere 5 slides left.
Okay.
Right. So this was another model we made. I think all these models were 1 to 20. The later models, not the side model, obviously. So this was a model looking through the house. So it's quite similar to one of the photos that you saw earlier on in the presentation. So we're looking from the film room through to the study, through to the living space at the back of the house. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the materiality. Flexibility of finishes is quite important to us as a studio. It's something we're always kind of interested in trying to push. And what we quite liked, well, we really liked the finish of the slurry brickwork and the galvanized steel as a kind of raw finish when it went on. And although eventually we ended up painting it white, we quite like the idea that designs can have multiple appearances, so it can change with tastes. And in 20 years' time, if someone decides that they get bored of the white house and they want to, you know, strip off the paintwork and expose the brickwork, that's kind of fine by us. Or they want to paint it a Technicolor, you know, pick out the steel in bright orange or something. We kind of like the fact that that could happen. Be happy with that. And then, even more finally, I'm going to talk about the technical challenges. So we've been asked quite a lot of questions about the exposed steel structural exoskeleton, because it's quite an unusual detail and one definitely not without its challenges. So here you can see a stick model, the structural engineer's stick model of the steel structure. So the blue in this model show the cold elements, so the elements that are exposed to the exterior, and the red show the warm elements of the structure. And so the issue we had was where these two join, because obviously you don't want the heat bleeding from the inside to the outside. So we eventually developed a detail which had numerous thermal breaks within the structure, which basically were kind of big insulated connections that stop the heat from the interior structure going to the external structure. And then another technical challenge was how to deal with the expansion, the difference in expansion between the steel and the brickwork on the external panels. Because, you know, obviously steel and brick expand at very different rates in the summer and winter. And so without a kind of careful detail, there's going to be a lot of cracking there. So basically every panel is quite subtle. Well, I think pretty much invisible, but every panel has a mastic joint, I think on 2 sides, some of them have 3, between the brickwork and the steel, so along these edges. And then we developed a detail where after the mastic was applied, while it was still kind of semi-tacky, we brushed on the slurry very shortly after. So you can't see the mastic, but it retains a structural flexibility. And we tested this detail over the period of a year. So I tested it in all seasons to make sure it worked with a panel that was on site. We developed this with a contractor who was very helpful and quite open to experimentation. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions?
Fantastic. Yes, there are. I'm just going to run through a few of them to you, and perhaps you can come back how you'd like to. One is about the predominantly white colour scheme. Was this a client request or developed through the design process?
I think, well, it was mostly a client request. I suppose the Palm Springs influence was quite strong, and she was very into these quite minimal interiors, but at the same time did want some warmth within the interior. So when we developed the detail of the painted and slurry blockwork in the hallway, that was kind of quite a breakthrough moment for us. And she was really into kind of bringing some of these more industrial textures into the project rather than just having white plastered walls everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So great looking building.
Thank you.
I agree with that, but this isn't a question. And by the way, it's really interesting to see your presentation and the one before on 2 such different buildings, both with Crittall windows in them. But hey, was dealing with the junction of the roof and the walls with the exposed soffit a challenge? How did you deal with air tightness? And then I'm going to ask you another one as well, and I think you can answer them together. How did you reconcile the single step changes of level with building control?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question. So air tightness, that was quite challenging, but because there were quite a few materials meeting, but it was kind of basically agreed with the builder that actually became the contractor's design portion. And the builder, we used tape at the junctions, but the walls were all kind of slurried, so there was a purging coat which helped retain some airtightness. The builder had a big thing against any sort of plastic going in the wall, so it was much more kind of purging coats and making sure there were no gaps in block work, and there were no gaps between where the composite deck met the block work. Oh yeah, and then building control. There's a slight level change over the site, so that means that there is building control do allow for there to be an instruction of steps. I think on a more public project we wouldn't be allowed to do this, but it's because it's a private, the nature of being a private house, a bit more accepting of that.
Okay, and then two questions which I think are different, but I quite like them together. One is, how did you manage to safeguard the piano from fluctuations in humidity, temperature and sunlight? And the other is, how was the acoustic addressed with hard surfaces, and what form of heating did you use?
Okay, so well, with the piano, that was a bit of a challenge because the client had ordered it from Steinway before the project was finished. And so I think it was her way of saying this has to be done by this date. And when the piano arrived, it wasn't finished. But the windows were in, so you know it wasn't a completely open site. But I mean, I'm not a piano expert, but there haven't been any complaints about the piano. In terms of the acoustics, that was something that came up in the project quite late on, because we actually the piano wasn't an original part of the brief, and she's kind of started talking about it as we were, I think we'd even kind of finished the tender, and there wasn't, you know, it was way after when we were going to be able to make big structural changes. And so what we eventually, we spoke to a few acoustic experts, and I'm not an expert myself, but my understanding is that the texture of the ceiling, although it's quite a bright surface, because it has these waves, that helps break up the sound, so it's not a phenomenally echoey space.
Right.
Although the photos are quite minimally taken, there's quite a few more soft furnishings.
Oh, are there? Okay.
Kind of baffled.
Architects' photos, architects' layout. I mean, actually, someone also asked a question, and I think we'll make this the last one. I mean, you talk, and it's really interesting about the references to all sorts of things, you know, and the sort of almost reinterpretation of the half-timbered house, but it's obviously something very different from what there is in most of Surbiton, beautifully different. But what sort of, how much difficulty did you have with planning?
Strangely, we didn't have any trouble with planning. It was,
wow.
I think it's been the easiest planning of any of the projects we had. They were very, very willing. I mean, we did have a bit of an issue with some bat surveys being taken at a certain time of year, which delayed everything. But in terms of design, they were quite open. I think it's helped a bit by the area is a lot of detached plots, and all the houses are totally different. So there's not, I mean, there is a bit of a prevailing style, but they didn't seem like, you know, they weren't going to make us build a half-timbered Tudor house, thankfully.
Okay, someone's just popped up saying, absolutely beautiful, Percy, thank you, which I think is probably the point at which we should end. It was beautiful and it was fascinating. And I think also, you know, the whole point of these PiP seminars is that PiP products in practice is really about not just the design, but the making of things and the detail that goes into them. I think your presentation was exemplary in that. And I think actually that all the presentations have been exemplary. So I think we've had a fascinating morning, and I don't know how many of our speakers are still here, but if you are, thank you again very much to all of them. Thank you to RIBA Journal. Thank you all to our audience who have been here in great numbers. There are currently 416 of you. Unfortunately, we did lose quite a lot of your lists of where you came from because of the little blip we had early on, but it's just lovely to see things saying how much you've enjoyed it all. And I just thank everyone for participating, and like to say, you know, there will be more. Watch this space and do come back again. It's been a morning very, very well spent. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you and goodbye.